A fancy bonfire effect is definitely a worthy project for our second tutorial. We'll be combining a shader graph with a particle editor as we did before with Portal Effect Tutorial 1. Check it out if you didn't yet. But without further ado, let's dive in. Let's make a new shader graph project and start with a sample texture module and a simple glowing circle image that we are going to distort later. I have my assets already prepared, and a simple drag and drop will do. Before we do anything else, let's just connect it to our pixel shader like this and save the project. My plan of action for distortion effect is to take a distortion noise and scroll it diagonally before we apply it to this glowing circle. Our best friend here is tiling an offset node. By default, it tiles in 2x2 size. I'm going to set the tiling to 1, so it's just one full texture. And then I'm going to use the time node to make the offset change over time in both X and Y directions. If you take time value and attach it directly to offset, it will do the trick, but I'm going to multiply it by a vector 2 value first, so we have control over direction and speed simultaneously. Setting this to 0.5 to both X and Y will move it at a half speed in the northwest direction. I'm using Math Node to do the multiplication. It can do all sorts of math operations, but all we need to do is just multiply, and if you just connect it to offset input of tiling and offset, things will get moving. Now that we have both a texture to distort and distortion motion, all we have to do is to add the noise. I will make some space for it and use a texture I made in Photoshop. It's a usual noise, but the key point is it's tileable, otherwise you can't scroll it smooth like this. We connect from left and right. This way, the value of image in the middle is offset of image on the right. And this is it for our shader. It's ready for export. One thing to do before that is to make sure we can control color from the particle editor. That means the final result needs to be multiplied by the value of the vertex color node. And then we reconnect it all together, save the project, and export our SHDR file to be used in the next step. Back to the particle editor, it's time to set up our first emitter, which will be spawning particles that each render with a shader we just made. As usual, I'm making two default modules, particle and emitter. And the first step is to choose a shaded sprite as drawable to select the SHDR file. You can drag and drop it or just use a file selector like I did. And we're going to do it with 5 particles per second. We don't need much since it's already animated inside the shader. That will ensure all the complexity. Life of each particle will be something like 3 seconds. And as for the offset, we want the fire particles to spawn somewhere in the bottom part of our effect, but not from the same point. I'd rather have them spawn in a range of an ellipse, which is a bit wide like this. You need to also uncheck the checkbox there, otherwise they will be spawning on the edges. Next order of importance is the size. We do this with a dynamic range module, as it allows you to have curves and min-max ranges for ultimate control. I want them to start small, grow proportionally fast, and then become slightly smaller over time before they die off. We do this with curves, simultaneously ensuring some randomness so it looks more natural. Transparency needs a bit of a ramp as well, so things look smooth. And I'll just adjust this a bit to my liking till the effect looks right. This already looks like a fire in terms of its shape. We are lacking some movement, which is achieved with angle and velocity values. Since the default angle is 90, pointing up, I will just add some growing velocity curve, and this should do. Finally, a nice gradient color to make this look like a fire, and we can finally say this is starting to look smoking hot. Speaking of smoke, there are 3 more elements we are missing here. That would be some glow and smoke elements, as well as little sparks and chunks of fire that fly chaotically around. It adds a lot of immersion, and I personally love this touch to any fire effect. Since these first two are simple, let's start with this spark emitter first. Our goal is to have them again emit from the bottom ellipse, but this time move in random directions left and right, but yet end up moving upwards to the end of their life cycle. To achieve this, we need to play with velocity and angle in a coordinated manner. In terms of velocity, I'm looking for quick movement, then for them to slow down abruptly so they can do a thing and fly away at fast speed again to their doom. This is a curve that should do it. In terms of angle, it's a bit more complicated. We want them to move in random directions at first, but then for upwards force to start taking over. Little sparks want to move up as temperature gets higher. To do that, I'm going to use the mix module in order to mix our two different motions in a way we want, which leaves us with a mix module, a number module for 90-degree angle, and a random range module for that random range of angles in the beginning. Lastly, we need a curve that will decide on how and when to mix these values. And while our intention is to go from bottom to up in terms of mixing, we want to make this slightly wonky for this unpredictable movement they usually have. Just to keep things organized, it's a good idea to group logical elements together with Ctrl+G or Command+G if you're on a Mac. I'll also add the offset as we discussed before to make sure our spawn location is not a simple point, but an ellipse like we did before. Now, this does not look right yet, since the magic is also in the shape, and since they kind of move slow and then fast and rapidly change their speed, but also are a big source of light. An authentic effect should have some kind of either motion blur or trail. After some trial and error though, I found that none of that fancy stuff matters, as long as we can just change their shape and size at the right times, so that they get longer when moving fast and shorter when moving slow. As long as this is kept, the illusion will be intact. Of course, I'm not going to leave them white, and we'll do another gradient color here, this time starting and ending with yellow and orange in the middle. This already looks pretty decent. I'm going to add some more emitters for glow and smoke on top, nothing fancy here, and it's pretty straightforward to do, so I'll speed up this part for you in order to save up some time. As I am finishing with the smoke, there is one more thing to focus on, which is a trouble of having an additively blended effect on a bright background. When this happens, the effect usually looks just burned and white. Luckily, there is a trick to address that, which is a pre-multiplied alpha technique. It's called Blend Add in Talos, and what we need to do is to make sure our shader has our alpha already pre-multiplied in color channels, and instead use alpha channel to control our blending, simultaneously changing the blending to Blend Add in Particle Editor as well. And that's it. This is our final effect. I like how it looks both realistic in terms of detail, but also a bit cartoonish in its style due to the shader. There are many things you can do in order to spice this up, change colors, and play with curves for sparkle angles and sizes. I personally prefer to also play with shader settings and try different noise textures. Let us know what you think in the comments or what other tutorials you want to see next. Thank you for watching. Please do subscribe, and I hope to see you in the next tutorial.